Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford, and today I'm going to begin a series talking about the hero Bodvar Bjarki, or Boðvarr Little Bear, from the Saga of King Hrólf Kraki. Now, as the 2 or 3 of you who follow this channel know, my translation of the Saga of Hrólf and Thórir with the Saga of Hrólf Kraki was postponed a little bit after the idea for the Wanderer's Hávamál came to me and my publisher, and we decided to prioritize that. But my translation of the Saga of Hrólf and Thórir with the Saga of Hrólf Kraki is forthcoming, probably, I'd say, in late 2020, early 2021, something like that. The translations are actually done. There's still work to be done, of course. There's peer review and all of those other things to be done, which again, the Hávamál book kind of took priority over this one, but it is coming, and I thought that it would be interesting to talk a little bit about the Saga of King Hrólfr Kraki. Now, unfortunately, this is actually a pretty difficult saga to follow all the way through, as it's really assembled out of many different parts about many different people, and a lot of the traditions are very old, but in fact the saga and its language are pretty late. So the whole thing is kind of a jumble. It's fairly difficult to read in Old Norse. It's not all that easy to translate into English. So what I thought might work well in going through the story is to focus not on Hrólfr Kraki himself, because he's really not the most interesting person to look at, even though the saga's named for him, but at the bizarre career of the hero Bodvar Bjarki, whose life actually has some parallels with Beowulf in Old English tradition, which I'll talk about a little bit in a future installment in this little series. So, according to the saga, Bodvar Bjarki is the grandson of a certain King Hring of Norway. So let's start with King Hring. He has a son named Bjorn, that simply means bear, and after King Hring's wife dies, he remarries to a queen named Hvít, who is, according to the saga in the Old Norse, she is one of the Finnar, but that doesn't mean Finns in the sense that we mean someone from Finland today. Instead it means Sami, a member of the Aboriginal people of northern Scandinavia, who in the Norse sagas are regarded as having magical capabilities very often. Now, one time when Hring is out of his kingdom on a raid, he's left his wife, Queen Hvít, who's much younger than him, in charge, and she propositions Bjorn, the king's young son. She says that their dealings, if you know what she means, with one another would be much better than what she had with such an old man as his father was. But Bjorn is offended by this scandalous suggestion, and he slaps her, refusing to sleep with his stepmother. Shades of course, the Greek story of, I think it's Phaedra or Robinson Jeffers Cawdor here. Well, she, of course, is offended at this in turn, and so she turns him into a bear and curses him to kill his father's livestock. So now Bjorn, whose name means bear, is a Bjorn, or bear. And the saga uses the same word for his name as for the animal he's become, which only becomes a little bit confusing. All right. Now, Bjorn has a girlfriend, the daughter of a farmer, and her name is Bera, which is actually the feminine form of Bjorn. It means lady bear, she bear. He approaches her one day in his bear form, and she recognizes her lover in his eyes. She follows him back to his cave, where at night he turns back into his human form. It turns out he's kind of a weir bear, or reverse weir bear. He's a bear by day, man by night. And so they start spending their nights together again, but in time, King Hring comes back from his overseas raids and realizes that there's this huge bear killing his livestock, and so he decides that he's going to go out and hunt down this bear. Well, one night in bed, shortly after this, Bjorn tells Bera that he is going to be killed by the king and his hunters the next morning. And then he shows her a ring, and he says, "I want to give you this ring. You will find it under my left shoulder in bear form tomorrow after they kill me. So after they've killed me, go to the king and ask him for whatever lies under the left shoulder of the bear, and then you can take this ring." Why does he not just give it to her, right? But that's part of the the dream logic of these stories. And then he tells her that she is pregnant. In the mythical-heroic sagas, these Fornaldir Sögur like this and like the Saga of the Volsungs, very often it's the man who tells the woman that she's pregnant, and he tells her that they're going to have 3 kids, and he says that he is going to leave a weapon for each one in his cave for them to get when they are of age. And he warns her that she must refuse to eat any meat from him because the queen is going to try to serve her some of the bear meat at a banquet after the bear hunt. All right, well, the next morning comes, and sure enough, Bjorn is killed by the king's hunters, although he kills a lot of the dogs and I think at least one of the hunters. And sure enough, Bera comes up to the king and says, hey, would you give me what's under the left shoulder of this bear? And he says, sure, and so she takes the ring. And then she goes back with him and his hunters to the king's hall for a banquet that evening, where the queen, sure enough, tries to get her to eat some of the bear meat. Now, Bera refuses, but the queen, scandalized that her hospitality is being turned down. Hospitality is a central tenet of Norse culture, and it is not only a basically sacred obligation to offer it, but also to receive it. You don't turn down something offered to you in terms of room and board at someone else's home. So Bera eats a little bit of the bear meat. Now she goes back home to her father, and she has a rough pregnancy, at the end of which she gives birth to 3 boys, just as Bjorn said she would. The first one, we are told, I'll just give this to you in a quote from my English translation, is a child, quote, who was a human in his top half, though he was a moose from his navel down. He was named Moose-Fróđi, Old Norse elg-frothi. Elg is related to the English word elk, but it doesn't mean what we call an elk here in North America. It means what's called an elk in the UK, i.e. a moose from a North American perspective. So he's half moose. It is never explained whether he is centaur-like, right? Like, does he have 4 moose legs, or does he have 2 moose legs? Is he more satyr-like? You can imagine it whichever way is funniest to you. And then the second one, quote, had dog's feet from the ankles down, and he was called Thórir Dog-foot, Hundsfother, because of this. He was the handsomest of men in every other respect. So even though we're talking about, you know, half animal people, we're still getting the typical saga emphasis on handsomeness. And then, quote, the third boy was born, and he was the handsomest of all 3. He was named Bodvar, and there was no fault in his appearance. His mother loved Bodvar best. So naturally, the one who's not a freak of nature is the one she loves best. All right, well, these 3 boys grow up, and by the time they're 12, they're stronger and they're more aggressive than anybody else in the area, and they're already a terror for the king's men. So Moose-Fróði comes to his mother and says he wants to leave, he wants to strike out on his own, and she says it's a good idea because he's too much for other men to handle. And she takes him to the cave where his father had left weapons for the boys, and in the cave wall there is embedded a long sword, an axe, and a short sword. Moose-Fróði tries to take the longsword, can't get it to budge, tries to get the axe, can't get it to budge, but he can take the short sword out. He's pretty disappointed at this because this is apparently the least cool of the 3 weapons, and in frustration he stabs it at the wall of the cave trying to break it, but instead it stabs through the rock, and he realizes what an excellent weapon it is, and then he goes off to build himself a cabin in the woods and rob and kill people. Right. Just like in the early part of the Saga of the Volsungs, this is Viking culture, so, you know, people who are robbing and killing, as long as it's not their own family members, can still be, relatively speaking, the heroes of our story. Sure enough, the second one, Thórir Dog-foot, same deal. He goes to the cave when he tells his mom he wants to go make his own way. He's the one who ends up taking the axe, and then he runs off and becomes the king of Götaland, now southwestern Sweden, when he is able to fit in the huge chair, which is the sole criterion for King of Götaland at this time. This does actually sort of come up later, him being the King of Götaland. Bodvar, the handsomest, the one with no fault of appearance, stays with his mom till he's 18, at which point she and he go to King Hring and tell him that Bodvar is the king's grandson, and they use the ring that Bera had taken from Bjorn to prove that Bodvar is descended from Bjorn. Since most things would have been made at home, more or less custom creations, you would probably recognize somebody's individual ring. You know, today there are not very many custom items of jewelry. Most things come from you know, a store, and it's sort of mass produced. This happens to be a custom ring from Ure Silversmiths in Montrose, Colorado, but there's not very many of those things out there. Anyway, so Hring believes Bodvar because he has the ring, and so then, realizing that Wheat is an evil witch, Hring more or less stands by as Bodvar puts a leather bag over her head and then beats her to death. And then shortly thereafter, Hring dies and Bodvar takes over as king, but he doesn't like ruling the kingdom very much, and before long he marries his mom off to a powerful jarl and he rides away seeking adventure. So in the next installment of this series about Bodvar Little Bear, I'm going to discuss the adventures that he has when he goes to the court of King Hrólfr Kraki in Denmark. Well, I hope that was a somewhat interesting or informative or maybe even amusing presentation for you. If you enjoy these videos, I hope that you'll help me make more for free and beautiful places by joining my Patreon. And for those of you who are members of my Patreon already, I thank you very much for allowing me to continue to come to the mountains and talk about Norse stuff and not go broke in the process of doing it. I firmly believe that information does not need to be locked up in an ivory tower or behind archaic language, and so I am trying bit by bit to bring good information about the Norse world and its language and myth to the internet in a reliable form, no less vetted than the classes that I teach at the University of Colorado or previously at the University of California. All right, well, for now, from beautiful Wyoming, I'm wishing you all the best.